The clock strikes midnight. Another day ends. Another opportunity slips away. Tomorrow, you whisper to yourself. Tomorrow I'll be more prepared. Tomorrow the timing will be better. Tomorrow I'll feel ready. But tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And suddenly you're looking back at a collection of tomorrows that never arrived. The greatest tragedy in life isn't failure. It's delay. It's allowing the illusion of someday readiness to rob you of the only time you're guaranteed. Today. What if readiness isn't something that arrives like a package at your doorstep? What if it's something you build through action, not through waiting? What if the very concept of feeling ready is the most sophisticated form of self-deception we've ever created? The question isn't whether you're ready. The question is, are you willing? You see, most of us are waiting for permission that will never arrive. We're waiting for that magical moment when fear disappears, when uncertainty transforms into clarity, when we finally feel qualified to pursue what matters most. But that moment, it doesn't exist. And that's what we're going to explore today. The beautiful, terrifying truth that the most meaningful accomplishments in life happen not because we were ready, but because we were willing to act before we felt ready. Have you ever wondered why some people accomplish extraordinary things while others with similar or even superior talents remain stuck? What separates them isn't talent. It isn't luck. It isn't even hard work. The difference lies in their relationship with readiness. Growth achievers understand something profound. Growth happens in the gap between where your abilities end and where your challenges begin. If you think about the first time you learned to ride a bicycle, were you ready? Of course not. You were terrified, you wobbled, you fell, but you got back up. And somewhere between the fear and the falling, you discovered your balance. You didn't learn to ride a bike by understanding the physics of momentum and balance. You learned by doing it before you were ready. The most successful people in any field aren't those who wait until they're ready. They're the ones who prepare as thoroughly as possible, set a date to begin, and then jump, ready or not. They understand that readiness is not something you wait for. It's something you work toward while you're already in motion. Consider the entrepreneur who launches with an imperfect product rather than waiting for the perfect one, or the artist who shares their work before they feel it's their best, or the person who initiates a difficult conversation despite the knot in their stomach. These aren't acts of recklessness, they're acts of courage. The courage to begin before you feel ready, to learn through action rather than anticipation. What happens when you adopt this mindset? Something remarkable. You start to recognize that readiness isn't a prerequisite for action. It's the result of it. Let me say that again. Readiness isn't a prerequisite for action. It's the result of it. You become ready by doing the very thing you don't feel ready to do. This isn't motivational fluff. It's psychological reality. Our brains develop new neural pathways through experience, not through contemplation. You can think about swimming for years, but until you get in the water, you'll never learn to swim. I've spoken with countless high achievers across different fields, business leaders, artists, athletes, scientists. When I asked them if they felt ready for their biggest breakthroughs, almost all of them laughed. They weren't ready, they were terrified, but they acted anyway. And that's the secret they rarely share in success stories. Behind every breakthrough is someone who felt inadequate, unprepared, and overwhelmed, but who stepped forward despite these feelings, not in the absence of them. What about you? What would change in your life if you stopped waiting to feel ready and started acting despite not feeling ready? But what about failure? You might ask, isn't acting before I'm ready a recipe for disaster? That's a fair question. And yes, acting before you're ready does increase the probability of setbacks and disappointments. But here's what it also does. It transforms failure from a final outcome into a learning process. When you wait to be ready, failure becomes catastrophic because you've invested so much in the preparation that the outcome feels definitive. But when you act before you're ready, with the expectation that you'll need to adjust along the way, failure becomes instructive. a natural part of your growth rather than a verdict on your capabilities. Think about learning any new skill. The first attempts are usually terrible, but each attempt teaches you something that moves you closer to mastery. The master isn't someone who avoided failure. They're someone who failed faster, learned quicker, and adjusted more frequently than everyone else. This principle applies to everything from learning an instrument to building a business to developing meaningful relationships. The path to mastery runs directly through the territory of incompetence. There's no way around it, only through it. But there's something else that happens when you act before you feel ready. You develop the most valuable skill of all, courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear. And like any skill, it grows stronger with practice. Each time you do something before you feel ready, you strengthen your courage muscle. You build evidence that you can handle uncertainty. You develop confidence not based on the absence of challenges, but on your proven ability to face them. This compounding courage becomes the foundation for everything else you want to accomplish. Because once you know you can act despite fear in one area, that knowledge transfers to other areas of your life. The person who launches a small side business despite feeling unprepared discovers they can also speak up in meetings despite feeling nervous. The individual who starts a fitness routine despite feeling out of shape finds they can also initiate difficult conversations despite feeling uncomfortable. Courage is transferable, and it begins with that first decision to act before you feel ready. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. Our brains are literally wired to protect us from uncertainty. The amygdala, our brain's fear center, treats the unknown as a threat. It floods our system with stress hormones when we face uncertainty, creating that familiar feeling of anxiety that makes us postpone action until we feel ready. This reaction made perfect sense for our ancestors who faced physical dangers daily. But in today's world, where psychological growth requires embracing uncertainty, this same mechanism can become our greatest limitation. So how do we override this natural tendency? How do we act before we're ready when everything in us screams to wait? First, we need to understand that discomfort is not danger. That knot in your stomach before trying something new isn't a warning. It's an invitation. It's your growth trying to happen. Second, we must reframe what action means. Taking action before you're ready doesn't mean acting without thought or preparation. It means establishing a point where preparation ends and action begins, and honoring that boundary even when fear tries to move it. Third, we need to start small. You don't climb Mount Everest on your first hike. You start with a hill, then a mountain, then a higher mountain. You build your uncertainty muscle gradually. And finally, we need to surround ourselves with others who understand this principle. Jim Carrey said, you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love. Find people who live by this wisdom, who encourage you to begin before you feel ready, because they know that's where growth happens. I want you to think about something you've been postponing until you feel ready. Maybe it's starting a business, writing a book, having that difficult conversation, making that life change you've been contemplating. Now ask yourself, what's the smallest step I could take today? Not when I feel ready, but today? That would move me in that direction? Not the entire journey, just the first step, or even half a step. Because here's the truth. That first small step will teach you more about the journey ahead than all your preparation and planning ever could. It will start generating real feedback rather than imagined scenarios. It will start building real confidence rather than theoretical knowledge. Most importantly, it will break the paralysis of waiting for readiness and replace it with the momentum of action. I once spoke with someone who had an idea for a book for nearly a decade. For 10 years, they researched, outlined, and planned, always feeling they needed to learn more, prepare more, be more before they could start writing. Right, one day, they set a simple goal. Write one page, not a masterpiece, not the whole book, just one imperfect page. That page became 2, then a chapter. Then, over the course of a year, a complete manuscript. Was it perfect? No. Did it need revision? Absolutely. but it existed, which is more than could be said for the previous 10 years of getting ready. When I asked what made the difference, they said something profound. I finally realized I was using readiness as a shield against the possibility of inadequacy. Once I admitted that, I could see that writing an imperfect book was infinitely better than perfectly planning a book that never existed. How many of us are doing the same thing? How many of us are using readiness as a shield against the possibility of inadequacy? Because that's what it often is. Not a practical concern, but emotional one. Not a matter of preparation, but a fear of being judged, of feeling exposed, of confronting our limitations. But here's the beautiful paradox. Only by confronting those limitations can we transcend them. Our potential exists just beyond the boundary of our comfort. And the only way to access it is to step into the discomfort of acting before we feel ready. This doesn't mean being reckless or impulsive. It means being honest about when preparation becomes procrastination. It means recognizing when I need to learn more really means I'm afraid to find out if what I already know is enough. Because often, what you already know is enough to begin. Not to perfect, but to begin. And beginning is the hardest part. Think of it this way. When you're driving at night, your headlights illuminate only a small portion of the road ahead, perhaps just 100 feet. But that's enough to drive the entire way home, as long as you keep moving. You don't need to see the entire route at once. You just need enough light for the next 100 feet. Action works the same way. You don't need perfect clarity about the entire journey ahead. You just need enough clarity for the next step. And taking that step will illuminate the one after. This is how all great accomplishments happen. Not through perfect preparation, but through persistent action in the face of imperfect knowledge. When you look at any significant innovation throughout history, you'll find that it wasn't created by someone who felt completely ready. It was created by someone who was willing to begin despite their doubts. But perfection is not the prerequisite for beginning. It's the enemy of it. Perfection paralyzes while action educates. Consider this. What if being ready doesn't mean feeling confident or having all the answers? What if being ready simply means being willing to be a beginner? What if it means being prepared to be unprepared, to be awkward, to make mistakes in public? Because that's what true readiness looks like. Not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act alongside it. Not perfect knowledge, but perfect commitment. The third reason we wait for readiness is fear of judgment. We worry what others will think if we stumble, if we show our incompetence, if we reveal that we don't have it all figured out. But here's something powerful to consider. Those who would judge you harshly for your courageous beginnings aren't the ones doing remarkable things with their lives. The critics rarely create. The mockers seldom make. The ridiculers rarely risk. Those who are engaged in their own meaningful pursuits understand the courage it takes to begin before you're ready. They respect the process because they're living it themselves. And those who aren't, whose identity is built on criticizing rather than creating, their opinions are irrelevant to your journey. When I look at the regrets people express at the end of their lives, I never hear, "I wish I'd waited until I felt more ready." Instead, they say, "I wish I'd had the courage to start sooner." They wish they'd asked for the promotion before they felt qualified. They wish they'd started the business before they had all the answers. They wish they'd initiated the conversation before they had the perfect words. They wish they'd begun the creative project before they felt talented enough. In the accounting of a life, we rarely regret the actions we took despite our fear. We regret the actions we never took because of our fear. So let me ask you a question that might change everything. What if the feeling of readiness never comes? What if 10 years from now you still don't feel ready to write that book, start that business, have that conversation, make that change? Well, you've waited a decade only to find yourself in exactly the same place with nothing but lost time to show for it. Or what if readiness isn't a feeling at all, but a decision? What if being ready is simply deciding that the cost of waiting has become greater than the cost of beginning? Because that's what it often comes down to. A simple calculation of which pain you prefer. The pain of disciplined action now, or the pain of regret later? The pain of growth, or the pain of stagnation? The pain of vulnerability, or the pain of never knowing what could have been? When framed this way, the choice becomes clearer. Yes, acting before you feel ready is uncomfortable. Yes, it involves risk. Yes, it guarantees moments of doubt and disappointment. But the alternative, a life of perpetual postponement, comes with its own pain, one that compounds over time and can't be undone. I've never met someone who took action, failed, learned, adjusted, and eventually succeeded who looked back with regret. But I've met countless people who regret the actions they never took because they were waiting to feel ready. So what does it actually look like to act before you're ready? It's not about being reckless or impulsive. It's about establishing a bias toward action within a framework of intelligent risk. Here are some principles that can guide. First, identify the smallest viable action. You don't need to write a book. Write a page. You don't need to transform your entire life. Change one habit. You don't need to launch a perfect business. Serve one customer. Reduce the scale until the action becomes doable, even if uncomfortable. Second, set clear, time-bound commitments. Don't say, I'll start when I feel ready. Say, I'll start Tuesday at 10 a.m., ready or not. Put it on your calendar. Tell someone else. Make the decision once rather than reconsidering it daily. Third, focus on process, not outcome. When you're doing something before you feel ready, the goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Each action builds your capacity for the next action. Each attempt teaches you something the previous attempt couldn't. Fourth, build a support system of fellow doers. Surround yourself with people who understand that growth happens through action, who celebrate beginnings rather than just outcomes, who normalize the messy middle parts of any worthwhile endeavor. Fifth, develop a relationship with fear and discomfort. Learn to recognize them not as warnings to stop, but as indicators that you're moving in the right direction. The presence of fear often points directly towards your greatest opportunities for growth. When you apply these principles, something remarkable happens. You stop viewing readiness as a prerequisite and start seeing it as a result. You recognize that you don't act because you're ready. You become ready because you act. And as you develop this habit of courageous action, you begin to trust yourself in a profound way. Not because you always succeed. You won't. Not because it gets easy. It doesn't. But because you prove to yourself again and again that you can handle the uncertainty. You can navigate the discomfort. You can learn from the setbacks. This self-trust becomes the foundation for everything else. It's the difference between those who spend their lives preparing for opportunities and those who create them. I want to address something important here. When I talk about acting before you're ready, I'm not suggesting you act without integrity, without consideration, or without care. I'm not advocating jumping blindly into situations where the potential harm outweighs the potential growth. What I am advocating is honest self-reflection about when I'm not ready is truly about lack of preparation, and when it's about fear masquerading as prudence. Ask yourself, if I knew I couldn't fail, would I still need more preparation? If the answer is no, then readiness isn't your issue. Fear is. And while fear can be useful, it keeps us from genuine danger. It's a terrible decision maker when it comes to growth opportunities. Fear always votes for safety, for the status quo, for the familiar. And sometimes that's the right choice. But not when it comes to your dreams, your potential, your deepest aspirations. For those, you need a different decision-making framework. One that acknowledges fear, but doesn't give it veto power. One that respects preparation, but doesn't use it as an excuse for postponement. I want to share a simple practice that has helped many people move from perpetual preparation to meaningful action. It's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go method. How do you find yourself hesitating to take action despite adequate preparation? Count down from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Then act immediately before your mind has time to generate more reasons to wait. This works because it interrupts the pattern of overthinking that keeps us stuck. It bypasses the rational mind. which is excellent at finding reasons to wait and engages the action-oriented part of our brain. Is it simple? Yes. Is it easy? No. But it works because it addresses the root cause of inaction. Not lack of knowledge, but lack of decision. Another powerful practice is what I call normalizing the gap. This involves deliberately seeking out the messy beginnings of success stories, the failures, the awkward first attempts, the moments of doubt. Most success narratives skip directly from inspiration to achievement, creating the illusion that success comes to those who are naturally gifted rather than to those who are naturally persistent. But when you deliberately seek out the full story, the rejections, the failures, the painful lessons, you begin to see that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is normal. It's not evidence that you're not ready. It's evidence that you're on the right path. Every master was once a disaster. Every expert was once a beginner. Every success story includes chapters that the teller might prefer to forget, but that were essential to their development. When you normalize this gap, you free yourself from the paralysis of perfectionism. You recognize that the discomfort you feel when trying something new isn't a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're doing it right. Growth is supposed to be uncomfortable. I want to challenge you to identify one area in your life where you've been postponing action until you feel ready. Maybe it's a career move, a creative project, a difficult conversation, a lifestyle change, something meaningful that you've been preparing for but not pursuing. Now imagine that you will never feel more ready than you do right now. The feeling of readiness you're waiting for will never arrive. It's not coming tomorrow, next week, or next year. Given that reality, what would you do differently? What small step would you take today? What commitment would you make? What action would become non-negotiable? Because that's the truth. The feeling of complete readiness rarely comes, and waiting for it keeps you trapped in preparation mode, never experiencing the growth that comes from actual engagement. The most successful people I've met don't wait to feel ready. They acknowledge their fear, do what preparation is genuinely necessary, and then act. Not because they feel ready, but because they're committed to becoming the person who can accomplish that goal. They understand that capability comes from action, not from contemplation. That confidence comes from evidence, not from reassurance. That growth comes from engagement, not from study alone. They live by the principle that you don't need to be great to start, but you need to start to be great. What would happen if you adopted this mindset? If instead of asking, "Am I ready?" you asked, "Am I willing?" If instead of waiting for confidence to act, you acted as a means of building confidence, I believe you would experience a profound shift from someone who is perpetually preparing for life to someone who is actively living it, from someone defined by potential to someone defined by impact, from someone waiting for the perfect moment to someone creating meaningful moments through action. Because here's what happens when you act before you feel ready. You discover capabilities you didn't know you had. You create opportunities that wouldn't otherwise exist. You build momentum that carries you past the points where you would have quit if you'd relied on feeling ready. Most importantly, you become the author of your life, rather than a spectator waiting for conditions to be perfect before you engage. Perfect conditions are rare. Perfect readiness is a myth. But perfect commitment, the decision to move forward despite doubt, to learn through action, to grow through experience, that's available to all of us at any moment. That commitment is what transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. Not because the committed never fail. They fail frequently. Not because the committed never doubt. They doubt regularly, but because they refuse to let their doubts dictate their actions. They understand the fundamental truth about achievement. It's not about feeling ready, willing to be uncomfortable, willing to be imperfect, willing to fail publicly on the path to eventual success. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you act without feeling ready, the more ready you become. Each action builds capability. Each failure teaches a lesson. Each moment of discomfort expands your comfort zone. So that thing you've been postponing until you feel ready, it's waiting for you. Not for some future version of you who feels confident and prepared, but for the you who exists right now. Doubts, fears, imperfections, and all. The you doesn't feel ready, but is willing to begin anyway. Because that version of you, the one who acts despite doubt rather than waiting for its absence, that's the version capable of extraordinary things. When we study the lives of those who have made significant impacts in any field, we don't find people who are exceptionally gifted or exceptionally lucky. We find people who are exceptionally willing. Willing to start before they felt ready, willing to persist when results weren't immediate, willing to keep going when others would have quit. That willingness, not talent, not circumstance, not luck, is what ultimately determines our impact. And the wonderful news is that willingness isn't something you're born with or without. It's a choice you make, a muscle you strengthen, a habit you develop through practice. Every time you choose action over hesitation, engagement over preparation, beginning over postponing, you strengthen that willingness muscle. You build evidence that you can handle the discomfort of growth. You develop trust in your ability to figure things out as you go, rather than needing to have all the answers up front. This self-trust becomes the foundation for everything else, because when you trust yourself to handle whatever comes, you no longer need the false security of feeling ready. You know that ready or not, you'll find a way. This doesn't mean the fear disappears. It doesn't mean the doubt vanishes. It doesn't mean you never question yourself. It simply means those feelings no longer control your actions. You feel the fear and act anyway. You acknowledge the doubt but don't obey it. You question yourself while continuing to move forward. The door to your greatest achievements will never open with the key of perfect readiness. That door opens with something far more accessible, the decision to be. Your future is being written right now, in this moment, by the actions you choose to take or postpone. Not next week, not when conditions improve, not when you finally feel ready. Now, there's a version of you that exists on the other side of action. More capable, more confident, more alive than the version that's waiting for readiness. That version isn't a fantasy. It's an inevitability, waiting for just one thing. Some of you will leave here today and continue waiting for that mythical moment of readiness. You'll convince yourselves that tomorrow is soon enough, that more preparation is necessary, that the timing isn't quite right. Others will recognize the precious opportunity that exists in this moment. The opportunity to transform knowledge into action, potential into impact, and dreams into reality. The opportunity to become the author of your life rather than merely its planner. Which will you choose? Because here's the ultimate truth. Life doesn't reward those who have the most information, the best plans, or the greatest potential. Life rewards those who make the move from knowing to doing, from planning to creating, from intending to acting. The world doesn't need more people who are perpetually getting ready. It needs people courageous enough to begin, to start the business, write the book, initiate the conversation, make the change, before they feel fully prepared. It needs you, not the someday ready version of you that may never arrive, but the willing version of you that exists right now. So as we conclude, I don't ask if you feel ready to apply what you've heard today. I ask if you're willing to embrace the beautiful discomfort of growth, willing to trade the certainty of mediocrity for the uncertainty of greatness, willing to do it even if, especially if you are not ready, because that willingness, more than any skill, talent, or circumstance, is what will ultimately determine the story of your life. The clock is ticking. Another moment passes, but this time, instead of another opportunity slipping away, you recognize the truth that changes everything. You will never be more ready to begin than you are right now.